Peter Hill Explains, where I invite you to join the science teaching conversation with me about Immanuel Kant. We're going to cover the Copernican revolution in philosophy. So this is episode 3. The first episode was his bio. The second episode was working towards the sort of crisis that erupted from Newtonian mechanics, that people could say, well, if I can work out how something works, I can work out how society works, perhaps I don't need religion, I don't need the state. And of course that prompted Kant to go in to say, well, it's not all experiments, it's rationalism. So there's experimentalism, rationalism, which proponents of it, I'd say I'm a bit of a rationalist myself personally. If you had to pin me somewhere between rationalist and experimentalist, Einstein is definitely a rationalist. He deduced things and did thought experiments overlooked. So you got to, there's not one right or wrong. And then coming up is the romanticists, so which, I really don't quite understand at the moment. Copernicus, Nicholas Copernicus, so he basically argued for a heliocentric solar system. Now it's important that people had a geocentric universe and a heliocentric solar system. It's not necessarily true that people thought the sun was the centre of the universe, and so definitely if you look at Descartes, he didn't think that way as we've just done it here. And we're doing a general tour through philosophy, having a little look at Aristotle, the first 40 philosophers, the monads, and the monads sort of sunk beneath the Aristotelians and have re-emerged as the way to get around Descartes' sort of experimentalist view of the mind-body union and all that type of stuff. So let's read this so far, and as a byline, I just really hope that my ability to read and sound a bit more interesting and easier to listen. So I'll pace myself. So the topic is 2.2 of Stanford's Philosophy Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and it's 2.2 Kant's Copernican Revolution in Philosophy. To see how Kant attempts to achieve this goal, that is to prove that you need God, in the Critique, it helps to reflect on his grounds for rejecting Platonism of the inaugural dissertations. So he initially wrote something on his inaugural dissertations when he finally got a chair at this Baltic Sea German port. Sort of hard to get your mind around all this geography. Platoism is basically a theory of forms. We're all inside the matrix of God's mind, and we can infer that we have been at different parts of the matrix because even a baby can identify chair. So a chair, he didn't have a sort of a learning model, he had a experiential model that someone could go, Dad, that's a chair, and everyone could agree that's something that's a chair. You had a form and various things like that. And then you have with the matrix, where does the computer program begin, or is there beginning or ends? In a way, the inaugural dissertation also tries to reconcile Newtonian science with traditional morality and religion, but its strategy is different from that of the Critique. So we're now working on to his Critique, his initial one. Well, there you go, Newtonian science. There's a problem. Newtonian science means that perhaps you don't need morality and religion, although Newton wouldn't have thought so. According to the inaugural dissertation, Newtonian science is true in a sensible world, which sensibility gives us access, and the understanding grasps principles of divine and moral perfection of a distinct world. So he has two different views. You have senses, and you can have understanding which goes beyond the senses, i.e. perhaps understanding maths, as various people would say. So Nicholas de Cusa believed in the maths. Coming up, to which sensibility gives us access, and the understanding grasps principles of the divine and moral perfection in a distinct intelligible world, which are paradigms for measuring everything in the sensible world. So, on this view, our knowledge of intelligible world is a priori because it does not depend on sensibility, and this is a priori knowledge furnished principles of judging a sensible world because, in some way, the sensible world itself conforms or imitates the intelligible world. Something, I'm not thinking too deeply about it, but I can sort of see where he comes from. Soon after writing the inaugural dissertation, however, Kant expressed doubts about this view. He explained on the 21st of February 1772, a letter to his friend and former student, Marcus Herz. Quote, "In my dissertation, I was content to explain the nature of intellectual representations in a merely negative way, namely to state they were not modifications of the soul brought about by the object. However, I silently passed over a further question of how a representation that refers to an object without being in any way affected by it can be possible. By what means these intellectual representations are given to us, if not by the way in which they affect us, and if such an intellectual representation depends on our inner activity, whence comes the agreement that they are supposed to have with the objects that are nevertheless not possibly produced thereby. As to how my understanding may form for itself concepts of things completely a priori, with the concepts the things must necessarily agree. And as to how my understanding may formulate real principles concerning the possibility of such concepts, with which principles experience must be exact agreement, and which nevertheless are independent of experience. The question of how the faculty of understanding achieves this conformity with things themselves is still left in a state of obscurity." So that's his. I'm trying out a little bit of an accent, so you can tell the difference there. Look, my overall thing is that this is more preserved nowadays of neuroscience and PET scans. How do I perceive this? And but this is the age-old Platonic problem that how does anyone know what a table is? Unless it's a socially agreed convention, which it is. And we socially we teach everybody the days of the week, and today is Monday, simply because everybody on the planet agrees with it. And if you don't turn up to work on a Monday, you can rightfully be fined. You can't disagree with that fact. Let's continue. Here Kant entertains doubts about how a priori knowledge of the intelligible world would be possible. The position of the inaugural dissertation is that the intelligible world is independent of human understanding and is of the sensible world, both of which in different ways conform to the intelligible world. But, leaving aside the question about what it means for a sensible world to conform with an intelligible world, how is it possible for the human understanding to conform or grasp the intelligible world? If the intelligible world is independent of our understanding, then it seems we could grasp it only if we are passively affected by it in some way. But for Kant, sensibility of our passive or receptive capacity to be affected by objects that are independent of us. So, the only way we could grasp an intelligible world that is independent of us is through sensibility, which means our knowledge of it could not be a priori. God. The pure understanding alone could best enable us to form representations of the intelligible world. But since these intellectual representations would entirely depend on our inner activity, quote, as Kant says to Hertz, we have no good reason to believe that they conform to an independent, intelligible world. Such a priori intellectual representations could well be figments of the brain that do not correspond to anything independent of the human mind. In any case, it is completely mysterious how there might come to be a correspondence between purely intellectual representations and independent, intelligible world. What this really means is, or what it means scientifically, is that Kant inspired a region of investigation which led to magnetic fields. Magnetic fields were beyond people's understanding, and you can see how magnetic fields really walked Newtonian mechanics across to rationalism. So Descartes has this amazing thing that magnets are proof of corkscrew particles which emanate down little holes to pull things together. You know, he had no real physical action at a distance. He had things like strings connecting things, which is, I suppose interesting. And then again, people's fascination with magnetism and Kant. It's really fascinating to go through that. So Ørsted was trying to study Kant, trying to understand Kant. You can imagine people at this time just saying, what? Oh no, well, here's some money for the next lecture. I think I might go to anthropology lecture instead. Okay, let's continue. Kant's strategy in the critique is similar to that of the inaugural dissertation in that both works attempt to reconcile modern science with traditional morality and religion by relegating them to distinct sensible and intelligible worlds, respectively. Okay, so he says that I can sense science, but religion is logical, that's something which I can think about. But the critique gives a far more modest and yet revolutionary account of a priori knowledge. As Kant's letter to Hertz suggests, the main problem with this view in the inaugural dissertation is that it tries to explain the possibility of a priori knowledge about a world that is entirely independent of the human mind. I should just mention here, you can't read it, of course, a priori in physics writing, if you use ab initio from first principle, a priori means it's a given, you know, that you're starting off with. It's written in italics, so this is why it's so hard to read. This turned out to be a dead end. And Kant never again maintained that we have a priori knowledge about an intelligible world precisely because such a world would be entirely independent of us. However, Kant's revolutionary position in the critique is that we can have a priori knowledge about the general structure of the sensible world because it's not entirely independent of the human mind. I think that's a go for me. The sensible world, or the world of appearances, is constructed by human mind from a combination of sensory matter that we receive passively and a priori forms that are supplied by our cognitive faculties. We have a priori knowledge of only about aspects of the sensible world that reflects the a priori forms supplied by our cognitive faculties. Kant's words, we can cognize of things a priori only what we ourselves have put into them. So according to the critique, a priori knowledge is possible only if, to the extent that the sensible world itself depends on the way human mind structures its experiences. Now we would say, yes, you do have a priori knowledge, but the a priori knowledge of the world has to be somehow coded in your DNA. So, you know, you can be never see another human being, never be associated with society, but your DNA is coded to be afraid of spiders and revolted by smells. There's certain things that are actually native or recognise a face that's actually hardwired into your brain. So it's interesting that he's struggling away, he didn't have DNA in front of him. Kant characterises this new constructivist view of experience in the critique through an analogy with a revolution brought by Copernicus in astronomy. This is fun stuff, and it's interesting that Nicholas de Cusa uses analogy, but now he's using an analogy. Now the difference is that Nicholas de Cusa would actually say, well, the analogy is imperfect, but we can really let's get into discussing the analogy. But let's listen to Kant. I'm going to put on a slight dramatic accent. Up to now, it has been assumed that all our cognition must conform to the objects. But all attempts to find out something about them a priori, although concepts that would extend our cognition have, on this proposition, come to nothing. Hence, let us try whether we do not get farther with the problems of metaphysics by assuming that objects must conform to our cognition, which would agree better with the requested possibility of an a priori cognition of them, which is to establish he can go on. Something about the objects before they are given to us. This would be just like the first thoughts of Copernicus, who, when he did not make good progress in the explanation of the celestial motions, if he assumed that the entire celestial host revolves around the observer, tried to see if he might not have a greater success if he made the observer revolve and left the stars at rest. Now, metaphysics we can try in a similar way regarding the intuition of objects. If intuition has to conform to the constitution of objects, then I do not see how we can know anything of them a priori. But if the objects, as the object of the senses, conforms to the constitution of our faculty of intuition, then I can very well represent this possibility to myself. Yet, because I cannot stop with these intuitions, if they are to become cognitions, but must refer them to the representations to something as the object and determine this object through them, I can assume either that the concepts through which I bring this determination also conform to the objects, and then I am once again in the same difficulty about how I could know anything about them a priori, or else I assume the objects, or what is the same thing, experience in which alone they can be recognized conforms to those concepts, in which case I immediately see an easier way out of the difficulty, since the experience itself is a kind of cognition requiring the understanding, whose rule I have to presuppose myself before any object is given to me, hence a priori, which as a rule is expressed in concepts a priori, to which all objects of the experience must therefore necessarily conform, and which they must agree. My goodness, that is the longest sentence I have ever seen. It goes for, I'll just count it off to you. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, or we'll call it 20, and each word, each line has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's 2,000 word sentence. That's 2,000 word sentence. No wonder people's brains blew up when they listened to this. Yet it's still a good thought that, oh God. Okay. Sorry, I was just blown away by that. I thought I had problems. Look, it's fantastic stuff. Everyone loves him. As this passage suggests, what Kant has changed in the critique is primarily his view about the role and powers of the understanding, since he already held in the oral dissertation that sensibility constitutes the form of time and space, which he calls pure or a priori intuitions, to our condition of the sensible world. But the critique claims that pure understanding too, rather than giving us insight into an intelligible world, is limited to providing forms which he calls pure or a priori concepts that structure a cognition of the sensible world. So now both sensibility and understanding work together to construct cognition of the sensible world. It therefore conforms to the a priori forms that are supplied to our cognitive faculties, the a priori intuitions of sensibility and a priori concepts of understanding. This account is analogous to the heliocentric revolution of Copernicus in astronomy, because both require contributions from the observer to be factored into the explanation of phenomena, although neither reduces the phenomena to the contributions of the observers alone. The way that celestial phenomena appear to us on Earth, according to Copernicus, is affected by the motions of the celestial bodies and the motion of the Earth, which is not a stationary body around which everything revolves. For Kant, analogously, the phenomena of human experience depend on both the sensory data we receive passively through the sensibility and our way our mind actively processes the data according to our own a priori rules. These rules supply a general framework in which the sensible world and all the objects or phenomena in it appear to us. So the sensible world and its phenomena are not entirely independent of the human mind, which contributes to the basic structure. I sort of get that. One of the things I was sort of thinking about, that huge 2,000 word sentence, obviously he hasn't spoken with anyone and they've gone, can you break it up, mate? Mate, I cannot understand what you're saying. You've got to break it up. And so it sort of tells you a little bit about his relationship. He would just be by himself and just chunder out those words. So chunder means the Australian word for vomit. Have a good old chunder. See, he's a word chunderer. Okay, let's continue. Oh my God. How does Kant, Copernicus revolution in philosophy improve on the strategy of the inaugural dissertation for reconciling modern science with traditional morality and religion? First, it gives Kant a new, ingenious way of placing modern science on an a priori foundation. He's now in a position to argue that we have a priori knowledge about the basic laws of modern science because those laws reflect the human mind's contribution to structuring our experience. Oh, dangerous, mate. In other words, the sensible world necessarily conforms to certain fundamental laws, such as every event has a cause, because human mind constructs it according to those laws. I think I might give you that one. Moreover, we can identify those laws by reflecting on the condition of possible experience, which reveals that it would be impossible for us to experience a world in which, for example, any given event fails to have a cause. From this, Kant concludes that metaphysics is indeed possible in the sense that we can have a priori knowledge that the entire sensible world, not just our actual experience, but any possible human experience, necessarily confirms certain laws. Kant calls this intimate metaphysics or metaphysics of experience because it deals with the essential principles that are immanent to human experience. I don't know. I just think of different areas of maths. Okay, but second if, quote, we can recognize, Japanese accent, we can recognize of things a priori only what we ourselves have put into them, end quote. And then we cannot have a priori knowledge about things whose existence and nature are entirely independent of the human mind, which Kant calls these things in themselves. In his words, from this deduction of our faculty of cognizing a priori, there emerges a very strange result, namely that this faculty we have can never get beyond the boundaries of possible experiences, and that such cognition reaches appearances only, leaving the thing itself as something actual or itself but unrecognized by us. That is, Kant's constructive foundation for scientific knowledge restricts science to the realm of appearances and implies that an a priori knowledge of things in themselves that transcends the possible human experience or transcendent metaphysics is impossible. Which leads, I think, to the German Vienna School. It's a whole lot of lines, so a lot of the people in Germany rejected the atom. In the critique of Kant, thus rejects the insight into the intelligible world that is defended by the inaugural dissertation. He now claims that rejecting knowledge about things in themselves is necessary for reconciling science with traditional morality and religion. Let's have a second read of that one. He now claims that rejecting knowledge about things in themselves is necessary for reconciling science and traditional morality and religion. This is pretty powerful stuff, interesting stuff, because that says if you want to have science and religion, you really can't know about things. Okay, this is because he complains that belief in God, freedom, and immortality have a strictly moral basis, and yet adopting these beliefs on moral grounds would be unjustified if we could know that they were false. Thus, Kant says, I had to deny knowledge in order to make room for faith. Oh, God. Restricting knowledge to appearances and relegating God to the soul, to an unknowable realm of things in themselves, guarantees that it is impossible to prove claims about God and the freedom or immortality of the soul, which moral arguments may therefore justify us in believing. Perhaps I'm a bit sad I've read all this. Moreover, the determinism of modern science no longer threatens the freedom required by traditional morality, because science, and therefore determinism apply only to appearance, and there is room and freedom in the realm of things themselves, where the self or soul is located. We cannot know, theoretically, that we are free because we cannot know anything about things in themselves. But the especially strong moral grounds for the belief in the human freedom, which acts as the keystone supporting other morality-grounded beliefs. In this way, Kant replaces transcendental metaphysics with a new practical science he calls metaphysics of morals. It thus turns out that two kinds of metaphysics are possible: metaphysics of experience and the metaphysics of moral, both of which depend on Kant's Copernican revolution in philosophy. Kant comes out with his basis that you can't know things to get across a boundary into morals, and you've got Descartes saying things can be really true if they feel as though they're true. Thus ends this episode 3 of Immanuel Kant. Another podcast, another story comes to a close. It's been a pleasure sharing this moment in time with you. May you discover truly amazing things, understand them, and tell others. Thanks for listening.